Hello, Tom. How's it going? Are you excited to talk about some IT news today?
Absolutely.
How's my quality here? I just want to check this. I'm seeing we're getting some. We have like two. Oh no, we have 3 bars now. So it's not. I'm not chunky or anything on your end.
No, no, no. Well, no chunkier than usual. Maybe you need to lay
Oh,
off the Halloween candy.
this is true. Are you a sweets man or a chocolate fiend there, Tom, or none of the above?
Uh, well, I've become a chocolate fiend over the last few years because I exercise dad prerogative and I get rid of all the things in the buckets that have peanut butter. Even though I'm almost positive that my kids don't have a peanut allergy, I'm still exercising that, even though they're like 13.
Just in case, better make sure.
Yeah.
And Dad'll take that bullet. Yeah, that's the brave act. Me and my wife have a perfect symbiosis of Halloween candy. I like the sweet. Like if you put a Skittle in front of me, I'm
Hmm.
good to go. And she's more of on the chocolate side. So between the two of us, we'll clean up everything that the kids get. Because they're 1 and 2, and they shouldn't have any candy beyond maybe a goldfish. Like that's the extent of it, I think. Are you ready to talk about some IT news here, Tom? And I meant a
I
live
am.
goldfish. Okay. So I'm going to press some buttons. We're going to talk about some IT news. It's going to be a rollicking good time. We have Microsoft news. We have some vaguely chippy news. We have some Flash news, which is, of course, the best news, which is why I have some retro graphics going on in the background to remind us of flashier times. So let's get it started right here in 3, 2, 1. Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino. I'm an editor here at Gestalt IT. Joining me from across my heart and across cyberspace is the one, the only Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rich. It's a spooky day on Halloween Eve, so hopefully the news isn't quite as spooky.
We will see. It certainly isn't that spooky for Huawei, and I want to go into our first story here because ARM's legal team ruled that its V8 and V9 chip designs are of UK origin and therefore do not need to be restricted from use from Huawei as a result of US trade sanctions. There's been some speculation about what the impact on Huawei's chip business, they make their own Kirin chips for their chipsets and a whole bunch of other hardware, and how that would be impacted. I think a lot of the speculation was in the near term. Obviously, they have the designs in house, even if they're not licensed to use them because of trade restrictions. But down the road, where does that go? Does this now lessen the fears of a hard ecosystem fragmentation as a result of these sanctions, Tom? I'm not talking about an OS level, but on a hardware level in terms of compatibility. Is that now in the past?
Yeah, I think this is ARM looking at the long game and realizing that these sanctions are liable to not persist much longer, and they are trying to skirt that in. And let's be fair, they're not trying to get cute and accidentally lose a container full of ARM chips somewhere in Shenzhen. This is them looking at it going, technically we don't feel like this is violating these export restrictions. And honestly, I'm pretty sure there may be a container truck full of $100 bills that mysteriously appears in front of somebody's house as a thank you gift, not a bribe, a thank you gift.
Yeah, I
But
was going to say ARM's
this
legal team cited the precedent of cash v bankruptcy.
Yeah, exactly, and I don't think ARM was in any serious danger of this, but I also think that if Huawei and other Chinese companies had decided suddenly that ARM wasn't the future, that could have led to problems down the road. So I think that as much as this is not really staving off fragmentation, because let's be fair, if somebody comes out with a cheaper chip than ARM in 2 years, they're all going to flock to it. No, this
Mhm.
is about playing a longer game than just, oh, hey, look, we're going to put a bunch of tariffs on these chips.
Is that kind of where these trade talks have kind of how this is kind of broken down, right? I mean, when the talk of these first came out, it seemed very hard edged. It was like, Huawei's just getting cut off from the rest of the world. They're just going to own China, I guess, figure stuff out, and then the rest of the world will get on. It seems like companies, big giant companies, being big giant companies with a lot of resources, they found ways to smooth this out, found kind of the path of least resistant, and kind of carved out little avenues to kind of keep business going as they are. I mean, Huawei's earnings were out, and they're still seeing growing revenue. I know this is still a short-term prospect. A lot of the implications of any trade sanctions haven't gone through fully yet, or are just kind of being still negotiated, I guess. But is that seem to be the case for you, Tom?
Yeah, just like any good Dungeons and Dragons players, we're trying to skirt by on the most strict interpretation of the rules that we possibly can because it technically means that I can roll a 7 here and still win. But really, what this means is that the blanket ban of, Huawei bad, maybe not so bad. And if they're willing to pay us, maybe they're good.
Money, the great salve of any regulatory burn. Coming up next year, Google announced that it will stop indexing content with Flash in late 2019, which seems like that's now, including indexing standalone SWF files. While it's no secret that Flash is dying, I mean, we have now Chrome blocking Flash content by default, and Adobe itself is committed, along with a kind of a consortium of companies, has committed to killing Flash by 2020. Is this the final nail in the coffin to kind of kill this once internet stalwart here, Tom?
I don't think there's a coffin anymore. I think it's just a collection of nails that have been glued together. I think back to Austin Powers, the character Mustafa, the one that gets dropped in and he goes, "Oh, I'm dead. I'm mostly dead. It's gangrenous." Literally, Flash is like a festering pile of gangrene over in the corner, and we still can't put a bullet in its brain to get rid of it because there's so much. Well, but this is a problem with formats when you think about it. Think about all the stuff that lives out there. I mean, I still find videos that are in real player format. But yet, that archaic version of whatever that is, I mean, sure, we could probably convert it or something like that. But when you think about how big Flash was at the height of, like, I don't know what, 2003, 2004, which hasn't been that long ago in relativistic terms. I mean, Newgrounds, I mean, those poor guys, they're dead because that was their entire thing was Flash. I don't think this is the final nail until Adobe finally does the thing they need to do and put it out of its misery. That will be the final coffin because you can run underground on the internet for months before people realize that's still a thing.
Can you think of another standard, or Flash was never a standard, but a technology like this where there was like a concerted industry effort to say, this is bad, we don't want to do it anymore, and to kind of move to that? I mean, I'm thinking of like what, SIFs, maybe? I don't know.
You just summon the spirit of Stephen Foskett to
no.
smack you over the back of the head. No, honestly, but even in the case of SIFs or SMB version 1, it wasn't that it was bad. It was that they came out with something better.
Yeah.
Even with Real Player, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't that Real Player was bad. It was great for what it needed to do back in the day. It's just that we finally got better at compressing video. No, Flash is absolutely what happens when an entire industry turns on itself and eats its own tail because this is horrible and we need to get rid of it.
The one thing that stinks in terms of search, though, is I imagine there's a lot of small businesses that just aren't tuned into this, right? I'm thinking of like I remember when I got married, admittedly, this was 7 years ago now, but like every wedding photographer entire website was just one giant big Flash app that would load up and do a slideshow and stuff like that. I do wonder if that, if we'll hear those complaints of these small businesses that, don't have a big impact on the web as a whole, but regionally maybe, or, even very locally have a significant presence or will be impacted materially by this. Yes, should they update? Of course. But I do wonder what the knock-on effect will be of that.
Hey, I have faith. If the Space Jam website is still up after all these years, they can transition off onto something else.
All right. Speaking of transitioning, the FCC issued a two-part proposal that would forbid ISPs from using funds from the Universal Service Fund that's used for kind of rural internet rollout. Oh, I dropped something. And so let's reset there before I drop my phone there. The FCC issued a two-part proposal that would forbid large ISPs from using funds from the Universal Service Fund to buy from ZTE and Huawei, as well as mandate that the telcos remove any banned equipment already installed. The FCC would offer reimbursements for these for these replacements, and they're going to be voting on these rules November 19th. So could be impacted fairly quickly here. Obviously, the big ISPs, I don't see. I mean, they have the most equipment, but are probably the least invested in this hardware and have the best ability to replace this. I'm wondering, though, yes, it's important to have financial remuneration for smaller ISPs, rural ISPs, and regional ones, but that's a big infrastructure ask for a lot of smaller companies, right, Tom?
It is. And considering that they're specifically targeting Universal Service Funds, USF, they're going after really small ISPs and they're going after education. That's basically where USF is extended. You may have heard of the program called E-rate. E-rate draws heavily on universal service fees. This is a very big line in the sand for the federal government. I know that we've talked in the past about, well, FCC says you can't use Huawei anywhere. This is basically outright saying that we will pay you to get rid of their equipment. Now, here's the question, and as my friend Greg Farrow from the Packet Pushers likes to point out, one of the reasons why people are all in love with Huawei has absolutely nothing to do with their quality, and it has everything to do with the fact that they supplement that by just being the cheapest thing out there. So, are they going to reimburse the fee that you paid for the Huawei equipment in the first place, or are they going to pay the replacement fee for whatever the equivalent is in a Cisco, Juniper, or Arista box? Because if you bought Huawei in the first place because you couldn't afford the other ones, and we're just going to give you the money back you paid for the Huawei device, you still can't buy the Cisco box.
Well, and then the other part of that comes in terms of, the expertise and the knowledge base. You've built your staff up to maintain that
Mm-hmm.
Huawei or ZTE equipment. Moving over to a different platform. Yeah, I mean, conceptually things will remain the same, but you're dealing with, I mean, at the very least, you're dealing with different dashboards. Having to reconfigure everything like that. There's a lot of man hours and kind of soft skills that you can't just throw money at to immediately replace. So I do wonder what the plan will be to do that, or if it's hey, you bought this, you knew Huawei's reputation, now you're kind of laying in that bed that you made.
I want to see who's actually going to take them up on this. Yeah, it's one thing to claim that you're banned from doing this, but with a package of stickers, I can fix that real fast.
Yeah, I do wonder if they will be like crawling or pinging traffic to see if they can determine like what the back end hardware is to ensure compliance on that. That's another big issue too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, Coming up here, Tom, I think we're seeing the close of a major story that we've been following here for months now in the Gestalt IT rundown. The U.S. Defense Department announced the winner of the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Contract, otherwise known as JEDI, and their winner was, drumroll, Microsoft? Yeah, they beat out Amazon, and it'll see Microsoft work with the Pentagon to modernize infrastructure with cloud services. It's estimated the contract could be worth up to $10 billion over the next decade, and we'll get to kind of the overall impact on Microsoft's business on that in terms of some context of how much that money means to them in their cloud business. Should we be surprised that Microsoft, though, knows how to make a compelling government bid? And is this a bigger win for Microsoft or a bigger loss for Amazon, Tom?
I think it's a 50-50 thing. Microsoft people were really happy that they got this contract because it kind of basically positions them as the not just the second place cloud provider, but a contender for first. I would also like to congratulate the U.S. Department of Defense for slapping some sense into Larry Ellison. For those of you who don't know, what the whole thing about this was is that Larry decided that he didn't like the fact that he got left out of the last round of bidding, so he sued to get the whole thing open back up. So, Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, rather than building rockets, you need to go buy Oracle, ship Larry off to his island volcano lair, and just kill the product. Just put it out of its misery. You've got enough money to do that. And thank Larry for his service in having this $10 billion contract yanked from you. I kid only a little bit. No, Amazon was basically in the driver's seat to win this, and then the Oracle lawsuit opened it back up, and that is all the gain for Satya Nadella. I think what you're going to see, though, is there are going to be a lot of people asking some very hard questions of Microsoft as to whether or not they can pull this off. And I bet you when the next round of bidding for a contract comes up, Amazon's not going to hold back. They are going to do everything they can to win because they see now they really do have competition.
Yeah, definitely. And, there was a whole bunch of behind the scenes kerfuffles, in terms of that Oracle lawsuit about conflicts of interest. There's all sorts of hubbub that perhaps there was some executive pressure to maybe not award Amazon. I don't know how much that all plays into this, but just huge, huge news for Microsoft and really just totally came out of left field. I mean, by all accounts, all the reporting up till this point basically said, Amazon has this in the bag, but technically it's down to 2 people, and we just have to wait for them to assign it. And really surprising to see Microsoft come up the winner there. And we will see. I'd be interested to see over the next maybe year or two of their earnings how that materially impacts that. And we'll, like I said, we have some earnings reports to talk about just a little bit here. Next up, though, Intel filed an antitrust lawsuit in the Northern District of California against the SoftBank-owned Fortress Investment Group. For some background here, Fortress owns more than 1,000 technology patents, and Intel is claiming that Fortress and companies it owns or controls, which is like all of the SoftBank stuff, filed lawsuits alleging every Intel processor since 2011 infringed on patents obtained from NXP Semiconductor, who's, I guess, largely known in the space for automotive chips and stuff like that, but has a long IP catalog as well. In the complaint, Intel states Fortress's allegation is intended for anti-competitive purpose to invest in patents that cost lower than the hold-up value of those patents, effectively maybe like the FRAND licensing that they could get from it. In a statement, Fortress Managing Director Gordon Runte called the lawsuit meritless. Is this the definition of irony for Intel to get hit with a fistful of patents here, Tom?
It's inevitable at this point, really. Well, the funny thing is that this has been happening to a lot of companies, Microsoft, Apple. And the interesting thing to me is that this was filed in the Northern District of California. Those of you who may not know, the most popular place in the world to file these patents for a very long time was the Eastern District of Texas, which is Plano and Marshall. In fact, that's the reason why there's no Apple store in Plano anymore. Apple moved the Apple store to Frisco so that they could no longer be sued because they have no presence in the district. And then there was a massive ruling from the district court, the circuit courts, that said that you have to sue where they're standing. And so now they basically had to go to the Northern District of California, which includes San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and say, hey, guess what? We're going to smack back. And I think that this may actually be something big because companies like SoftBank and other patent right holders, and I'm going to single one of them out, VernetX, they're the reason why FaceTime is a hot garbage dumpster fire. They want to assemble these patents and basically get companies to settle. Microsoft is notorious for settling. They do the cost benefit analysis and they realize that it's cheaper to pay these people to go away on a monthly basis than it is to fight them in court. Companies like Newegg, on the other hand, not only want to fight them, they will drag them back into the courtroom and refuse to settle just to invalidate patents. I am interested to see if Intel's actually going to stick with this, though, because one thing that I'll tell you about patent lawsuits, as someone who followed the infamous SCO versus Novell Unix Linux patent, it could take the better part of 10 years for this to get settled. Now, obviously, if it takes 10 years, you want to come out on the winning side, so all you have to do is pay legal fees. Because if you have to pay damages plus interest on a 10-year court case, that's not going to be good for you.
I do always feel bad for the juries on those cases because, I mean, you want to talk about how do you possibly stay engaged? I mean, that's always the challenge. They say that's the biggest challenge with these long-standing patent cases. Is how do you keep the jury engaged when you're talking about, the fineries of chip manufacturing and stuff like that? It's highly technical, and like you said, this goes over 10 years. I mean, I'm thinking of these Samsung Apple lawsuits that were going back and forth, for close to a decade over design, and that's something that at least you can physically, you can physically see and appreciate, maybe handle. You have like a little bit more of a materiality about it. But if anyone wants some more insight on this, I remember This American Life did a great look at some of this patent lawsuit stuff where they sent someone to the Eastern District of Texas and these office parks that are just full of empty offices so that companies can say they have presence in those states to sue and stuff like that. Really fascinating stuff. And yeah, we'll see if Intel has the stomach to stand up to this. Or if this is more of a warning shot for other companies, maybe to that Intel is willing to lawyer up and not necessarily settle automatically. We will see. Up next here, Google uses .new domains to let users create things like Google Docs or calendar entries. They just recently added the calendar ability. You can also do notes. So you type like doc.new and it'll open up a new doc automatically. Google has now opened the domain to others to register. Trademark owners can register a domain until January 14th, and others can apply for a .new domain starting December 2nd. Microsoft has registered for a Word.new to start a new Word document. Spotify registered Playlist.new and Podcast.new. I don't know if I want to be able to start a new podcast just from a URL. Seems like maybe we have enough of those already. eBay registered Sell.new and Stripe registered Invoice.new. we've seen a struggle for these new top level domains to become anything other than a novelty. Is this kind of appification of a top level domain, or I guess making top level domains a function, the only way we're going to get these to catch on beyond .com, .org, .gov, Tom?
I'm going to register dumpsterfire.nu to describe this whole situation because, quite honestly, this was stupid when Google was doing it. I have never, ever in the history of my life looked at Chrome and said, you know what? I need to open a brand new Google. Well, first of all, I've never looked at Chrome and said, I need to open a brand new Google Docs Word form because Word is on my computer and that's what everybody uses. But then to think, well, do I click on the Word icon? No, I should type doc.new. No, bad idea. And opening it up to other people is basically just trying to say, please buy our stuff, and make no mistake about it. In order to be able to reserve those very juicy things like Word.new and Excel.new and PowerPoint.new, Microsoft had to pay through the nose to get those.
I do think it's interesting. It almost reminds me of like a weird return to almost like a CLI kind of situation where instead of doing this easy graphical thing, we're going to come up with this, this, I don't know, this hyper productivity. Like if you need to open Word docs, create new Word docs, blank Word docs all the time, this is your jam. The one thing I could see is if they found a way to integrate templates. So if you could like create like,
wedding invitation.new or something like that, where like I have a very very specific idea that I could pull into a workflow, like an iOS shortcut almost, where I could pop up an iOS shortcut, type this into the thing, because well, honestly, who would be doing that on iOS anyway? But like this this feels like when all of the really good ideas are taken and you're in a brainstorming session and nobody's paying attention and the guy in the corner comes up with this idea just so he can get out of the meeting. That's where this feels like it came from, because this isn't going to take off. This is honestly another example of the whole .sucks domain, where they came up with .sucks and then immediately tried to sell all the brand .sucks things to the brands so that they could squat on them. Yeah, McDonald's .sucks was only ever offered to McDonald's. And if you wanted to register that yourself as me, like, because McDonald's sucks, it would have been like $50,000 for me to register that. I'm sorry, McDonald's doesn't suck that bad.
Maybe not to you, but to Taco Bell, perhaps. I do. The only thing I will bring up is maybe we are the olds now, Tom, and like this will be like me going up to edit, copy, instead of doing or like not opening up an app in Finder or something like that. I feel like maybe there's a generation of people that are going to school using Chromebooks, and this actually makes a lot of sense if you're just living in a browser to be able to do creation. I want to start using it just so I don't look like one of the olds.
But the funny thing is that typing things into a command line to open stuff up is what old people did. I used Edlin. Come on.
Would you have a problem though if we get more command line ish with this way though? I feel like that's a win net.
We'll see.
All right. We will also see about some public cloud earnings now to kind of finish out the show here. All three public cloud giants posted earnings this week. Let's try to tease out some findings here, Tom. Now, some of them make it easier than others. We'll go in order of from least opaque to most opaque, I guess is how I will put it. Amazon, of course, the easiest, reporting AWS generated $9 billion in revenue, up 35% on the year. Sounds great, but slowing growth for the fourth consecutive quarter, quarter on quarter. That's not year on year. Microsoft's intelligent cloud business, meanwhile, which includes Azure, but also Windows Server, GitHub, other things, generated $10.85 billion in revenue. And Microsoft specifically said Azure grew 59% on the year, admittedly down on one quarter from 64% the last quarter, still significantly bigger growth than what we're seeing from Amazon. Meanwhile, little old Alphabet reported Google other revenue, which includes Google Cloud, but also their hardware and a bunch of weird stuff that this all kind of lumped together, generated $6.42 billion in revenue, up 40%. So the least and the second lowest growth rate out of the three, whatever. Is this officially now a two-horse race? And given the JEDI contract, is Microsoft closer to first than the cloud narrative would perhaps suggest here, Tom?
It's a two-horse race. It's Amazon, Azure, and everybody else. And everybody else is a boutique player at this point. If you want to do K8s, you go to Google. If you want to do AI, you go to IBM. If you want to have a moon base, you go to Larry and Oracle. That was two this time.
If you want to do some on metal, some bare metal cloud stuff, Oracle is a really interesting solution for that, I will say.
Yeah. Now, where it gets really interesting is when you look at these numbers, they're slowing growth. Well, first thing Wall Street wants to do is punish companies because they built that growth into their projections, which is why Amazon was off by $0.1 billion. So, what, $100 million? And they got beat up in the stock market for it because they only had 35% year over year growth. They were down one quarter. Question for all you Wall Street nerds out there. What happens when a market gets saturated? Growth slows. And that's what's happening. When you look at the fact that everybody was up 35 to 54%, there's growth in there, but not as much growth as you want. It's like saying, well, I'm already doing 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. Yeah, but you could be doing 25. No, I am comfortable with what I'm doing right now. And I promise you, Amazon's still going to be making revenue out of this whole thing. And there was a very interesting podcast. If you're a fan of the Packet Pushers, they covered this on their podcast that came out on Monday. And they were talking about the fact that there's a very good possibility that AWS may get spun out from Amazon in the near future as an antitrust measure. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but if that happens, if they're no longer subsidizing the build out of the one-day delivery stuff, I mean, how much further can they grow? And that would be a very interesting thing to see happen. I don't think Azure is going to spin out from Microsoft anytime soon. We already played that game with them in the 90s, and they're smart enough to keep some very tall hedges between those two business units. But I think ultimately what you're going to see is cloud growth is going to slow, not because the cloud is becoming not a thing anymore, but because all of the things that we've moved to cloud at this time are the things that can go there. And we're going to have a new wave of innovation to cloudify things that can't go there. Or we're going to have a tightening or a loosening of regulations for things like, I don't know, medical records and patient data and school children identifying information that really shouldn't be stored in the public cloud without assurances that it's not going to leak. And ultimately, when that wave hits, you'll see more cloud growth. Now, what's going to happen in the long term, in the short term, is if Amazon and Microsoft think that they're going to start losing out on this revenue, they're going to start doing more and more crazy things to get people to adopt cloud computing. So AI and ML everywhere. Buying companies to do cloud migrations. We talked about that last week with Microsoft and their Movere acquisition.
Yeah.
Yeah, at this point, I'm almost positive that Jeff Bezos is going to build a damn cloud snowball spaceship, and he's going to have your data like beamed to orbit and then beamed into a Microsoft, data center somewhere, because that's the only way he can continue to ingest data at a rate that will allow Wall Street to reward him enough to go to the moon.
Yeah, the whole idea of AWS spinning out from Amazon. I mean, one, your Prime membership just goes up to $500.
Pretty much.
And it also perhaps speaks to the growth of other Amazon business sectors. Obviously, AWS is their huge profit center from them, and like in terms of but as in terms of overall revenue, it's not the biggest thing, but it is hugely profitable for that company. So that
it's something like 14% of their overall gross intake of revenue, but it's 74% of their profit. So you got to think about that. They are a very tiny fish that is responsible for feeding the rest of the pond.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of to your point of why Microsoft wouldn't do that, I would argue the reason they won the JEDI contract, after that dispute was kind of opened up, was that they could offer all sorts of other incentives on top of just their cloud services because they have that integration, and that is a huge advantage for Microsoft. Whereas Amazon is building out every single niche use case you could ever possibly need for your cloud instance, but they still don't have maybe those legacy hooks that Microsoft can always offer and always will be able to offer. That legacy has been seen as a detriment to sometimes to growing their business in new directions. But when you can tie it into such a huge potential future growth market like Azure, it definitely becomes a selling point.
Yeah.
Well, that just about brings us to the end of the Gestalt IT rundown. Poor little Google Cloud. Oh, I just want to pet it so little. But thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, running down the IT news of the week live on Facebook or later on YouTube. So check that out. Like the page, subscribe, smash that like button, as the kids say. And if you don't like it, click that thumbs down arrow twice. Ha ha ha, I'm very clever. Tom, where would you like people to find more of your great stuff if they are so inclined?
Well, I write weekly at networkingnerd.net, but also at gestaltit.com. Interesting security pieces coming out in the next couple of months. Turns out security is a big thing that people are really interested in, and I've been talking to a lot of great companies. So I think there's some interesting stuff coming this way, and there may even be an AI or ML article coming out.
Ooh, I am intrigued. I will have to look for that. You can also find me at gestaltit.com or on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology. That's MR Anthropology. Like I said, we'll be back next Wednesday, so meet us there. Until then, remember everybody, have a super sparkly